here, from Ethiopia down to Kenya. So here, you are back home. And they say that Adam was the first human being who was an African. This is also the oldest country in terms of governance in the continent. It was the only country that was not colonized. So what you see here is not a relic of any kind of colonization. Apart from a brief invasion by Italians, this country has always ruled itself. When they came here, they found an institution that was much older and stronger than they left back home where they came from. So you must be proud that Africa actually is the mother of civilization. When Africans were struggling, Ethiopia offered support for liberation of Africa. And the liberation movement moved, and eventually colonialism was defeated. So there were centers: Accra, Cairo, Addis Ababa, Dar es Salaam. Those were the origins of African Organization of African Union. 2.5 weeks ago, we were here in Addis Ababa to come at the launch of the refurbished African Hall, where the Organization of African Unity was founded in May 1963. At that time, I came under a different category. I was invited as a descendant of my father, who was one of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Union. At that time, a big part of Africa had already been liberated. They were represented by presidents. But there was part of Africa which was not free, Kenya was being one of them. Kenya, Zimbabwe, Zambia, then Rhodesia, Mozambique, Swaziland, now Eswatini, South Africa, Basuto land then, now Lesotho, Bechuana land then, now Botswana, West Africa, now Namibia, Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Sao Tome and Principe, and Cape Verde. So, in that congregation of the African leaders, presidents, the two people who spoke on behalf of the liberation movements, and that was Nelson Mandela and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. So now we were invited as the descendants of the founding fathers to witness the opening of that hall. That is why I was here last time. Now, my extensive travels across the length and breadth of Africa have exposed me to the enormous riches and unexploited opportunities in our great continent. I have also had the opportunity to serve the African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development in Africa between 2018 and 2023, for which I remain profoundly grateful. But I have also represented the AU in other capacity. When Ivory Coast was in turmoil, the then chair of the AU, Mr. Jean Ping, approached me and asked me to be the African Union representative to mediate in the crisis in Ivory Coast. I have also been involved in other peace initiatives in Burundi under Maldimu Julius Nyerere to negotiate peace in Burundi. I was also involved in Mozambique when there was a crisis, when the opposition had refused to accept the results and they needed somebody to go and bring them together. I was involved in the negotiations in Mozambique. So I understand Africa from other perspectives. But I was asked by the current chair to be the high representative of Africa on the field of infrastructure. And I know most of the representatives here from that perspective. This position gave me the opportunity to further appreciate Africa's myriad infrastructural and associated challenges. Here, we were dealing with several infrastructure across the continent. We were dealing with trans-African highways, because Africa has got a elaborate program, PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, with presidential champions for all these infrastructure projects. But there are several challenges that are being faced. That position gave me the inside story of what needs to be sorted out in the African Union. We are dealing with trans-African highways, the Cape to Cairo, the Tunis to the Cape, the Dakar through Bamako, Khartoum to Djibouti, the Dakar to Lagos, Lagos to Mombasa. Then you have the trans-African high-speed railway networks from Beira in Mozambique through Zambia, DRC to Lobito in Angola, and then down to Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have the trans-African high-speed railway, again from Lagos through the western coast all the way to Cairo. Then you have the LAPSET, the Lamu Port, South Sudan and Ethiopia corridor, which we later on revised to move the railway line from the port of Lamu in Kenya through South Sudan, the Central African Republic, Cameroon port of Kribi, to create a land bridge that links the Atlantic and Indian Ocean and opening up the interior of the continent to transport and trade. These were major challenges. Then we are dealing also with energy. Africa is the richest continent in as far as green energy potential is concerned. The green energy, the solar, the sun is here from January to December. Then you've got geothermal potential in the Rift Valley. Then you've got wind potential around the continent. You've got the hydro potentials in the continent. These are the areas. In the Inga Dam in Congo, you can generate over 100 gigawatts of power. And then you can use that to supply energy across the continent and lower the cost of energy in the continent. You have got the Southern African Power Pool, you've got the Eastern African Power Pool, the Central African Power Pool, the West African Power Pool, and the North. And you can interconnect these power pools and bring down the cost of energy to what is acceptable universally. In some places in the continent, like if you go to the Gambia, the cost of electricity is 38 US cents per unit. What can you do with that? In some places, it is 4 US cents per unit. So if you want to be able to process the raw materials that are available in abundance on the continent, you must address the issue of energy acceptability in our own continent. And that was one of the issues we dealt with. The issue of high-speed connectivity, fiber optics, was another one, to connect all the African capitals so that communication can become much easier and faster. and give our people access to the internet. Then the open skies was another issue. Open skies to bring down the cost of air transport on the continent. Africa is huge, and the infrastructure down on the roads and highways and railways are not yet fully developed. But we've got the skies, which are free. You don't need to construct anything. All you need is just construct airports and buy planes. That's all. But then there are barriers which have been put there. Each and every country has got their own air traffic control. And to fly the airspace, you have to get a permission and you have to pay. And this makes the air transport so expensive in Africa, where the air transport is mostly needed. The air transport in Africa is much more expensive than it is in Europe. In Europe, they have got one European air traffic control. And once you've been cleared, you can just fly. You only inform the other countries that I'm overflying, and you have no problem. In Africa, you have to wait days to be given a clearance if you are trying to fly with your own aeroplane. The other time, I was trying to fly from Dar es Salaam to Niamey in Niger for a conference. I was holed up in Dar es Salaam in a hotel for 10 hours because you must get an overflight clearance over Uganda, DRC, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger itself. At that time, I was going for the funeral of the president of Namibia. I'm sitting in Nairobi at the airport for 3 hours to get clearance over Tanzania, DRC, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia itself. So these are self-imposed restrictions on our continent. This is what we call the low-hanging fruits that you can harvest without a problem. But these are still there as a challenge. These are some of the problems that we were dealing with when I was there. And saying that this means a challenge that we need to deal with going forward. Then, in the continent, we have the youth. The youth is the biggest asset that we have in our continent. The African continent is a young continent because 70% of our youth are below the age of 35. This can be an asset, or it can also be a challenge. Because the youth, if they are not empowered, they become a drag on the economy. They become drug addicts. They become criminals. And they become a drag on the economy. But if they're empowered with skills,
it should be back now.
Thank you. Thank you. So, our youth are the biggest resource that we have in the continent. But we first need to give the youth the requisite tools that they require to be able to create wealth for our continent. This is another major challenge to us. This is what other countries have done. This is what China did. China empowered the youth and gave them skills so that when they opened up their economy, the big manufacturing companies rushed to China because they saw there highly skilled and cheap manpower and also cheap raw materials. So you go to China, all the major manufacturing companies are in China. The automobile, Mercedes is there, BMW is there, Volkswagen is there, Peugeot is there, Citroën, Volvo, Ford, Toyota, Nissan, Hyundai, all of them are in China. In Germany, they tell me it is cheaper to manufacture a Mercedes-Benz in China and ship it back to Germany than the one manufactured in Stuttgart, Germany. That enabled China to move 600 million people from poverty to middle income status. So China is today no longer the cheapest destination because most of the people have become more affluent. A gap is left down there underneath which Africa can fill. Because China has the cheap raw materials, but those raw materials are made with original raw materials from Africa. They have cheap industrial materials. They have got steel, they have got copper, they have got aluminium. But all those are made with raw materials coming from Africa. So if you can do the value addition on the continent, then you don't need to, people don't need to go to China. Those industries will come to Africa. And Africa will become the next factory of the world. This is one of the things that I have in mind. Disunity has undermined our ability to mobilize our resources, to catalyze the collective dreams of the continent's citizens. Africa's unity is therefore sacred to me. We must return unity to the top of our priorities as Mwalimu Nyerere and Nkrumah did. Without unity in a fast consolidating and changing world, Africa will continue to be marginalized, exploited and irrelevant. It is why today I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to open your minds to a new Africa. Imagine an Africa that's booming with industry, where businessmen and women from Bamako in Mali can take the transcontinental high-speed rail to trade in Kampala, Uganda, where the cotton material from Lomé in Togo can be bought online by our housewife in Lusaka, where African products can be bought in supermarkets across the world under the name of African brands owned by Africans, and the African workers and farmers are proud of their products. An Africa that does not require visas for other Africans. An African men and women who do not climb on a rickety boat or in an airplane cargo hold, risking their lives to go to greener pastures. I envision a continent whose progress is driven by its own people, that pushes to be a dynamic, influential, and respected force in the international arena. And here, again, the barriers which we place on ourselves. My friend Aliko Dangote, one of the most prominent African businessmen, tells me, Raila, it's so difficult to do business in Africa. I need 35 visas to travel across the African continent. Yet my French competitor does not need any visa. The French passport can go to all African countries. How then can you compete? How can you benefit by being African? You're being punished because you're an African. These are some of the barriers which make us look just stupid. In Europe, when I was living there, traveling in Europe was very difficult. You had to have a visa. When I was traveling from Germany to Britain on a train, they need a visa to transit through Belgium or Holland, 2 visas. And if you did not have that visa, they put you back on the train back to where you came from. Today, you don't need a visa in Europe. The Schengen visa, you can go to any country in Europe. You only get, if you're traveling by road, you only get to know that you have crossed the border by seeing the different registration numbers. And so Europe has become a village. Why can we not do that in Africa? I intend to see that we introduce Africa, the AU visas, like the Schengen visa. So my leadership at the AU will not be one of the same rhetorics, where people meet a few times a year and return to their enclaves. My leadership will be pegged on the dreams of our forefathers, who expected that by now Africa would roar in one united voice. So here, we know, every year there's a General Assembly here. The jets come, land, and they move in here. Coming into these premises is not as easy as you came today. Today it was easy because you are coming to meet a candidate. Then those days, there's a lot of security. Then there's a lot of talk in the halls here. Monsieur le Président, this and that, resolutions are passed, and off the jets will leave again Addis Ababa. I can tell you without fear of contradiction that 93% of these resolutions which are passed here are never implemented. That is by confirmation from Mr. Faki himself. So it has become a talking shop. I intend to change that to ensure that all the resolutions which are passed here are properly implemented. So we will not put anything in the agenda and the resolution if we know it cannot be implemented. And if it's not implemented, we'll have a very good reason to explain why it was not implemented. My vision for the youth is to place them at the center stage and driving force behind the innovation and change. Today, African youth are drowning on ships and boats, rickety boats, trying to get to Europe, going to greener pastures. It's a big shame that we're losing young, energetic people because of the poverty on our continent. So the solution is to change this by creating proper employment opportunities on the continent so that they don't have to leave the continent going to look for jobs where they're not wanted. You're ramped there as a refugee, you're taken there as a prisoner. It's a big shame. So these young people will find jobs here. Pick a vibrant cities buzzing with energy as young entrepreneurs leverage technology and creativity to build dynamic businesses. With AI and digital resources at their fingertips, they invent solutions for our unique challenges, transforming agriculture with smart farming technologies, revolutionizing healthcare with telemedicine, and reshaping education through accessible online platforms. Our young minds are not just participants in the global economy. They are leaders, innovators, and change makers. My economic transformation plan envisions an economically transformed continent, thriving on the richness of its resources and the unity of its people, a continent that not only sustains itself, but is a powerhouse of global trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area will be more than a policy. It will be a reality. Imagine goods flowing seamlessly across the borders, facilitated by advanced logistics and digital platforms, creating jobs fostering innovation, and ensuring that no Africa goes hungry. My environmental sustainability plan envisions our rich biodiversity. It is protected, and our natural resources are managed wisely. In the face of climate change, we lead the way in renewable energy, harnessing the sun and the wind power to power our homes and industries. Our agricultural practices need to be regenerative, preserving our land for future generations and ensure food security for all. Africa is not the offender in this debate on climate change. Africa is a victim because Africa's emission is less than 5%, about 3%, somewhere there. But Africa suffers the biggest effect in this animal called climate change. Many of African countries today live between two twin disasters: floods and drought, El Nino and his sister La Nina. Floods, when the floods come, they destroy homes. People drown. Our infrastructure is devastated. Bridges are washed, and so on and so forth. And when the drought comes, livestock is dying. People go hungry. There's no food, famine, and so on. So first, we need to make our contribution to this agenda of climate change by greening Africa, rolling back the desert. But we are also the biggest arable land available today on the planet Earth. So we make use of what we have on the continent. But in the negotiations for compensation, if we go as Benin, as Cape Verde, as Egypt, as Senegal, as Kenya, they just look at you.